The morning sunlight slipped through the kitchen window as Margaret stood by the counter waiting for the kettle to whistle. The air outside was cool, painted with the colors of early autumn. She had always loved this time of year, when the trees outside her Oregon home turned amber and gold. And the world seemed to slow down. At 70, she didn't expect her days to hold much surprise anymore. But that day, her life changed in a way she could never have imagined. Her daughter Claire was running late again. Margaret could hear the sound of the car tires on the gravel road before she saw it. Claire's voice called from the window. "Mom, I'm sorry. Traffic's awful. Can you take Ethan to school today?" Margaret smiled, nodding, as she always did. She had taken care of her grandson since he was a baby. And he was the brightest part of her days. But as Ethan stepped out of the car, Margaret noticed something different. He wasn't his usual cheerful self. Normally, he would run to her with open arms, his small backpack bouncing on his shoulders. That morning, he walked slowly, his head down, his hands tucked deep into his jacket pockets. Claire waved quickly, blowing a kiss, and drove off before Margaret could say anything. "Good morning, sweetheart," Margaret said, smiling warmly. But Ethan only nodded, his eyes avoiding hers. There was something distant in his expression, something that made her heart sink a little. She brushed it off, thinking maybe he was tired. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and old wood. Margaret made pancakes, Ethan's favorite. She placed them in front of him, drizzled with honey just the way he liked. But he didn't touch them. He just sat there, staring at the table, small fingers tracing patterns in the syrup. "Ethan," she said softly, "is everything all right, dear?" He looked up slowly, his blue eyes deeper than she'd ever seen them. Then he whispered, "Grandma, you look different today." Margaret blinked, surprised. "Different? How?" she asked. But he only shook his head, his gaze steady, his tone quiet. "You just do." Then he went back to staring at the table. The room fell silent. Margaret tried to focus on her coffee, but unease settled in her chest. Children say strange things sometimes, she told herself. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After breakfast, Ethan wandered into the living room. He stopped by the piano, the old wooden one that had belonged to Margaret's late husband, George. It hadn't been played in years. She watched as Ethan slowly lifted the cover and pressed a few keys. The sound was soft, a little out of tune, but familiar. Then, to Margaret's shock, he began playing a melody, one she hadn't heard since George was alive. Her heart froze. It was a slow, haunting tune that George had written for her when they were young, back when love was new and life was full of hope. She felt tears prick her eyes as she whispered, "Ethan, where did you learn that song?" Ethan didn't look at her. His fingers moved gently over the keys. "Grandpa showed me," he said simply. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, trying to stay calm, "your grandpa passed away a long time ago. Remember?" Ethan finally turned to her. His voice was barely a whisper. "He was with me last night." Margaret's heart pounded. She tried to smile, thinking maybe he'd had a dream. "Oh, did you dream about him?" she asked gently. But Ethan shook his head. "No, he was sitting on the edge of my bed. He told me to tell you something." Her hands trembled as she sat down beside him. "And what did he tell you?" Ethan looked down at the piano keys, his voice shaking. "He said he's sorry, that he should have told you the truth before he left." The words hit her like thunder. "The truth?" she repeated. "What truth?" But Ethan only stared at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "He said you'd understand when you opened it," he said softly. Margaret's mind began to spin. Could he mean the letter? The one George had left before he died. The one she had never been able to open. She had kept it tucked away in a wooden box in her bedroom for 12 long years. "Ethan," she said gently, "did Grandpa tell you about the letter?" He nodded slowly. He said, "It's time." Before Margaret could say another word, Ethan's expression suddenly changed. His face went pale and his small hands gripped the piano. "Grandma," he whispered weakly, he said, "it's not over yet." And then he collapsed. Margaret rushed forward, catching him before he hit the floor. "Ethan! Oh my God, Ethan!" she cried, her voice trembling. She shook him gently, and after a moment, his eyelids fluttered open. "I'm okay," he whispered faintly. "I'm just tired." She laid him on the couch, covering him with a blanket. Her hands shook as she called Claire. When her daughter answered, Margaret told her everything, the piano, the words, the fainting. But Claire sighed. "Mom, it's probably just stress. He's been having strange dreams lately. Don't scare him with all that ghost talk." Margaret didn't argue, but her heart was heavy. When Ethan woke later that afternoon, he seemed fine. They played a board game, watched a movie, and for a while, he was his usual cheerful self again. But when Claire came to pick him up, Margaret noticed something odd. Ethan turned back at the door, gave her a long look, and said quietly, "Don't be afraid to open it, Grandma. He wants you to know." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind again and again. "He wants you to know." The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock. She got up, walked to her dresser, pulled out the wooden box. Inside was the letter, yellowed at the edges but still sealed. She had never found the courage to read it. The pain of losing George had been too heavy back then, and she'd told herself she didn't need to know whatever it contained. But now, with Ethan's strange words echoing in her heart, she knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She sat down on the bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Her heart raced as she touched the paper. It felt warm, almost alive. Just then, a faint sound came from the hallway. Soft footsteps. Margaret froze. "Ethan?" she whispered, forgetting he was gone. But no one answered. She turned her head toward the mirror across the room, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw him. George, standing there, faint and smiling. Like a reflection from a dream. The letter slipped from her hands, landing softly on the bedspread. Margaret's lips quivered as she whispered, "George, what did you do?" And somewhere in the silence, she thought she heard a voice, low, tender, and familiar. "It's time, Maggie. It's time you knew." The next morning would bring the truth she had avoided for years. But she didn't know yet that the truth would change everything she believed about her husband, her daughter, and the very family she thought she knew. The morning after Ethan's strange words, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with the unopened letter lying before her. The light from the window hit the paper softly, making the edges glow. It had been 12 years since George's death, and yet holding the letter made it feel like yesterday. Her heart beat faster as she looked at his familiar handwriting, bold and steady. Just as it had been in life. She hesitated for a long time. Every time she tried to open it before, she couldn't. She had always told herself that George's silence was easier to bear than knowing what he might have hidden. But now, with Ethan's voice echoing in her head, he said it's time she knew she had to face it. Finally. She broke the seal. The letter unfolded easily, the ink faded but still clear. It began just as she expected. "My dearest Maggie," the way he had always called her. But what followed made her chest tighten. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you the truth in person. I need to confess something that happened before you and I built this life together. I never meant for it to follow me this far, but it has. And I fear it might one day reach you too." Margaret frowned. She kept reading, her hands trembling slightly. "Before I met you, I made a mistake, a big one. There was someone else years ago. Her name was Elise. We were young, foolish, and I thought I loved her. But when I found out she was married, I left her. A year later, she wrote to me saying she had a son. She never asked for anything, never even told me the boy's name. But she said he looked like me. Maggie, I didn't know what to do. I was ashamed. And I never told you because I was afraid I'd lose you." The words blurred as tears filled Margaret's eyes. She leaned back, pressing her hand to her chest. George, the man she had trusted, the man who had built a life with her, raised a daughter with her, had carried this secret all their lives. But the letter wasn't over. Years later, when we moved to Portland, I saw her again. She was older, frail, and she told me her son had grown up nearby. I never met him, Maggie. I swear I didn't. But she said he was married and that he had a little girl. I didn't think much of it then. Until the day we met Claire's fiancé, Mark. The first moment I saw him, I knew. He looked just like me when I was young. Margaret froze. The words hit her like lightning. Mark. Claire's husband. Ethan's father. She felt the room spin around her. Could it be true? Could her daughter's husband, her grandson's father, be the son of George's long-ago affair? The letter went on, "I never told Claire. How could I? It would have destroyed her. But I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. If she ever learns the truth, tell her I didn't know when she married him. I only realized afterward. And I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't. You loved him like a son, and I couldn't bear to break your heart again. Maggie, please forgive me." Margaret dropped the letter, her breath shaking. The kitchen seemed smaller, the air heavier. She tried to think clearly, but her mind raced with questions. If this is true, what does that make Ethan? What kind of secret have I been living with all these years? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. It was Claire. Her voice hurried. "Mom? I came to get the casserole dish." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the letter on the table and the look on Margaret's face. "Mom, what's wrong?" Margaret couldn't speak. She just pushed the letter toward her. "You should read it." Claire frowned, picking up the paper. As she read, her face shifted confusion, disbelief, anger. "This isn't true," she whispered. "It can't be." "Dad wouldn't, Claire." Margaret interrupted softly. "Your father never lied to me before. And this sounds like his truth." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "So you're telling me my husband might be Dad's son? That Ethan is, what, my half-brother's child?" Margaret reached out, but Claire stepped back. "Mom, this is insane. Mark doesn't even look like Grandpa." But deep down, Claire knew there was something. Mark had always reminded her of her father. His calmness, his stubbornness, even the way he smiled. She just never thought much of it. "I can't believe this," Claire said, shaking her head. "Why would Dad write something like this? Maybe he was confused. Maybe it's not true." "Claire," Margaret said quietly, "Ethan said something yesterday. He said your father came to him. He said George wanted me to open the letter." Claire looked at her mother like she'd lost her mind. "You're saying Dad's ghost told Ethan to tell you?" "Mom, that's not possible." "I know how it sounds," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "But you didn't see him, Claire. You didn't hear the way he spoke. It wasn't like a child making things up. It felt real." Claire rubbed her temples, pacing. "Even if it was real, what are we supposed to do?" "Tell Mark. Tell Ethan." Before Margaret could answer, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was calm, but there was a strange tone to it. "Claire, can you both come home? I think we need to talk." Something in his voice sent a chill through her. Claire agreed, and within the hour, they were at her house. Mark was sitting in the living room holding an old envelope. When Claire walked in, he stood up, his face pale. "I got this in the mail today," he said, handing it to her. "It's addressed to me from a lawyer in Portland. It says there's a file about my birth I need to see." Claire's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a birth certificate, one that listed father, George Whitman. The room went silent. Mark looked at them both, confusion and pain written on his face. "Is this true?" he asked. Margaret sat down heavily. "Your mother's name was Elise, wasn't it?" she asked softly. Mark nodded slowly. "Yes. How do you know that?" Claire's face crumpled. Because my dad wrote about her." She handed him the letter. Mark read it in silence. His hands trembled, and his voice broke when he finally spoke. "So I married my half-sister." "No," Margaret said quickly. "You didn't know? You both didn't, and it's not your fault." But the words couldn't soften the blow. Claire covered her face, sobbing. "What does this mean for Ethan?" Mark's eyes filled with tears. "It means I've built a life on something I never knew was wrong." Margaret stood and put a hand on his shoulder. "No, you built a life on love, and that's never wrong. You and Claire love each other, and Ethan is your child. That's all that matters now." But the pain in the room was thick, impossible to escape. Claire couldn't look at Mark. And Mark couldn't stop looking at the letter that had changed everything. That night, Margaret stayed at their house. Ethan was asleep upstairs, peaceful and unaware. She sat by the window watching the stars, thinking about George, the man she loved, the man whose secret had just torn their family open for a long time. She sat in silence until she heard a soft voice behind her. "Grandma." She turned to see Ethan standing there, his eyes sleepy. "Are you sad again?" he asked. Margaret smiled weakly. "A little." He climbed into her lap, resting his head on her shoulder. "Grandpa said you'd be sad tonight, but he also said you'd understand." Her breath caught. "Understand what, sweetheart?" "That love doesn't stop when people make mistakes," Ethan whispered. "He said you'll know what to do when the sun comes up." Margaret closed her eyes, tears falling silently. She held her grandson close, his small heartbeat steady against hers. When morning came, she would do what George had asked. She would find forgiveness for him, for Claire, for Mark, and even for herself. But as the night deepened and the house grew still, she couldn't help but wonder, how do you forgive a love that changed everything? The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sunlight spilled through the curtains of Claire's living room, touching the faces of those who had barely slept. Margaret sat on the couch, a cup of untouched coffee in her hands. Across from her, Claire and Mark sat apart, their eyes red from crying. No one spoke. The truth from the night before still hung in the air, fragile and painful. Ethan's laughter broke the silence. He was playing with his toy cars in the hallway, unaware of the storm that had shaken his family. His voice, innocent and bright, echoed through the room. "Grandma, look. My car goes so fast," he said, smiling at her. Margaret forced a smile back, nodding softly. For him, the world was still simple. For the adults, it had just become something they didn't know how to fix. Mark stood and began pacing. "I keep thinking there's been some mistake," he said finally. "There has to be. Maybe the lawyer got it wrong. Maybe George isn't Claire cut him off gently. Mark, please. The letter, the birth record, they match. We can't pretend it's not true." Her voice cracked, and she looked at him with a mixture of pain and love. "But what do we do now? What are we supposed to tell Ethan when he's older?" Mark stopped pacing. "We tell him the truth," he said quietly, "but not today. Today, we just hold on to what we still have." Margaret looked up at him, surprised by his calmness. Despite everything, there was strength in his voice, a steadiness that reminded her so much of George. She realized, painfully, that maybe that was why she had always trusted Mark so deeply. He carried that same gentle courage. Claire wiped her eyes and whispered, "I don't even know how to look at you right now. Not because of you, but because everything I thought I knew about my family is different." Mark sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Claire," he said softly, "you're still the woman I love. That hasn't changed. And Ethan is still our son. Whatever happened before us, it doesn't change who we are now." She turned her head slowly to meet his eyes. There was so much emotion there, love, guilt, confusion. For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of Ethan's car wheels clicking on the floor filled the space between them. Margaret looked away, out the window, and whispered to herself, "George, if only you were here to see what your silence has done." But then she remembered Ethan's words from the night before. He said, "You'll know what to do when the sun comes up." She took a deep breath. "We can't let this destroy us," she said suddenly. Both Claire and Mark looked up. "Your father made a mistake a long time ago. But he loved us. He spent his life trying to protect us, even if it meant hiding something that painful. And now it's our turn to do the same. To protect Ethan, he deserves a family that's whole, not broken by the past." Claire's lips trembled. "But how do we forgive something like this?" Margaret's eyes softened. "You forgive because holding on to anger only keeps the pain alive. You forgive because love is heavier when you don't." For a moment, no one spoke. The words sank deep into the quiet. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway again, his toy car in one hand and a small photo in the other. "Grandma, look what I found." he said cheerfully. Margaret took the photo gently. It was an old picture, one she hadn't seen in years. George was in it, smiling proudly, with little Claire sitting on his lap. She looked at it for a long moment, feeling tears rise again. "Where did you find this, sweetheart?" she asked. "In the attic," Ethan said. "It was in a box. Grandpa told me to find it." Mark and Claire exchanged uneasy glances. Claire knelt beside her son. "Ethan," she said softly, "what do you mean Grandpa told you to find it?" Ethan shrugged innocently. "He came to me again. Not like a dream, more like he was standing there. He said to give Grandma this picture and tell her not to be sad anymore." Mark looked at Margaret, uncertain. "He's probably imagining things," he whispered. But Margaret's eyes were wet. "Maybe," she said quietly, "or maybe not." She stared at the photo again, noticing something she hadn't before. A letter folded behind it. She carefully pulled it out. It was smaller, older, and addressed simply, "For Maggie, if you ever need to know why." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't make things right myself. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I was afraid of losing you, and in that fear, I made choices I'll regret forever. But please remember me for the love we shared, not the mistakes I made. I believe love is stronger than blood. The family we built, you, Claire, and little Ethan, that's what's real. Take care of them. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them they're not cursed by my past. They're blessed by the love that came from it." Margaret's tears finally fell. The words felt like George himself was speaking to her through time. She looked up at Claire and Mark, her heart both aching and healing all at once. "He wanted us to move on," she said. "He didn't want his mistakes to define our future." Claire nodded slowly. "Then maybe we should try." Mark took her hand hesitantly at first. She didn't pull away, for the first time since the truth had come out. They sat together, side by side, the distance between them shrinking. Ethan climbed onto the couch between them, smiling. "Are you happy now, Grandma?" Margaret brushed a tear from her cheek. "Getting there, sweetheart?" Later that afternoon, the three of them went to the park near their home, the same one where George used to take Claire when she was little. The autumn air was cool, the trees golden and soft in the sunlight. Ethan ran ahead, chasing falling leaves, his laughter echoing like music. Mark and Claire walked behind him, hand in hand. "Do you think we'll ever be the same again?" Claire asked quietly. Mark thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly, "but maybe we'll be something new. Maybe better." She looked at him and nodded. "Maybe that's what forgiveness looks like." Margaret watched them from a nearby bench, a faint smile on her lips. For the first time in days, she felt peace. She pulled out George's old letter and looked at it once more before tucking it into her coat pocket. Then she whispered softly, "You were right, George. Love really is stronger than blood." As she sat there, a gentle breeze brushed her face, and for a fleeting moment, she could almost hear George's voice, warm, familiar, and filled with love. "Thank you, Maggie." She closed her eyes and let the wind carry her tears away. When she opened them again, Ethan was running toward her, holding a small white feather in his hand. "Look, Grandma. Grandpa sent this from heaven." She took it from him, smiling through her tears. "Maybe he did," she said softly. Maybe he did. That evening, they had dinner together, not as a broken family, but as one learning to heal. They laughed, shared stories, and even found comfort in the silence between words. The past still hurt, but the love that remained was stronger. Before bedtime, Margaret tucked Ethan in. He looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, "Grandpa says he's proud of you." Her breath caught. "He does." Ethan nodded. "He said you found the light again." Margaret kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, sweetheart." As she walked out of the room, she turned off the light and whispered into the darkness, "Good night, George." Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant laughter, the kind that only love leaves behind. And for the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt guided by it. She finally understood what Ethan had been trying to tell her all along, that sometimes those we lose don't really leave us. They stay quietly watching, waiting for us to forgive and to live again.